While there is still no word on a cure for the virus,
report suspicious activity and call 911.
I can give you every assurance, Mr. Rodriguez. It's all in his
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, pal.
Hey, man.
Feel a little weird in the throat again.
Yeah, you're sounding a little on the groggy side.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we said last week that it would be a couple weeks until season 5, and we weren't wrong, and we weren't lying.
Yeah.
I think, though, that we may have implied that we might not do another episode until then, and honestly, we thought about it.
Yeah.
But it felt so good to be back in these chairs, man, in front of these mics, and so we thought we'd jump back in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a good way of, I don't know, just get, like, so Woody and I have, like, what I refer to as, like, a guilt complex where if, and we had this with the band, too, we're constantly feeling like we're letting down our fans, and so this is just sort of another example of that.
Yeah, and so, well, and that, and, you know, frankly, we missed talking to you guys and each other about this this stuff. And it's funny when we're like kind of thinking about what we want to talk about in the upcoming season, you can't really do that without sort of reviewing what you've talked about in the previous season. And so often you'll hear us say like, "No, I don't know if we have brought this up on the show yet," but and so that's going to continue, I'm sure. But you know, I was just thinking, you know, hey, I think it would be kind of fun for us to, this week, for me to kind of bring and it's hard, this was a very hard sort of assignment here, but for me to bring 4 of my favorite episodes from this season. And even that was kind of hard to whittle down to just 4. There was a lot of really, really cool stuff that we talked about. So this week we're going to talk about sort of 4 that, to me, kind of stood out, not just because of what we covered, but for the conversations that we had and the fun time that we had, you know, talking about it and all of that. And then maybe next week Tyler can bring his, and hopefully we have different favorites. I'm sure there's going to be some overlap there. But anyhow, all right. So
Actually, that's a little unfair because I don't know what yours are, and so,
well, I figured you might like either say you might just pick different ones.
I mean, but what if all of yours are the only ones that I like?
Because, dude, it was so hard to choose. I know that that's going to be impossible.
Yeah.
And the reason I did it this way was because you'd be like, well, I don't really. And then I'd have to change one of mine. And selfishly, I was like, I'm going to come up with it.
Perks of pre-planning.
Now, would you agree, Tyler, that in our dynamic, who worries about that stuff the most?
I don't like this.
I don't like where this conversation is going.
Well, I would say I'm more vocal about it, but when it comes to
Actually doing the organizing,
putting in the work, I usually
defer.
let you, defer.
And that's on me. I should never have allowed it. I'm kidding, dude. Okay, so I say without further ado, man, let's stop making this a mystery here. Are you ready to dive into what my favorite were this season?
I sure am.
Okay, now, real quick, this is not in order of importance. So I picked 4, and I'm just going to talk about them. I think I'd kind of organize them today in like numerical order. So first, season 4, episode 4, Invisible Beings Walk the Earth. Now, for me, this is kind of the beginning of what ended up not really being a thing, but we, for several weeks, talked about phenomenon like invisible beings, ghosts, shadow people, shadow man encounters. I mean, we had like a whole month basically dedicated to the shadow man. Yeah. Just by accident, only because like once we went through it, and I think this is what kind of kicked it off, once we started getting through it, we're like, man, there's a lot of this stuff. Oh, yeah. And there's people's personal encounters, There's our own experiences. I really mean Tyler's experiences with that kind of thing. But with this episode specifically, we kind of just talked about it in more of like broad terms, where we're talking about invisible beings, entities, civilizations even living among us without us even kind of knowing. In other words, living essentially in the same quote unquote like spatial area. And so like with those concepts, it's like for me, it was sort of equal parts amazing and also kind of freaky, you know? The idea that the world that we live in is so much sort of stranger than we think. And some of the examples that we talked about in this episode, I think we even reached into some like ancient folklore to like modern day sightings. And it just to sort of solidify the fact that, dude, people have been dealing with this kind of stuff for as long as they've been able to tell people about it.
And this was part of like the Summer of the Shadow Man stuff, right?
This is before that.
Before that? Let me go
Yes,
back.
remember, this is episode 4, which came out in, I think, it would have been like February or maybe March. Yeah, February 26th. And then the first thing, you know, it was a while until we got to Apparition, Shadow People, and Strangers in the Dark was in May. And then we did some other stuff for a while, and then Shadow Man was in July.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. When I started like looking at, and again, like I think I can speak for both of us here. It's hard to remember what season was what. You know, sometimes I'm kind of shocked. I'm like, wow, we talked about that in season 2. It doesn't seem that long ago, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I was looking at these, I kind of noticed there was a pretty strong theme this year about that kind of thing. Entities, ghosts, apparitions, shadow people. And it all kind of kicked off right here with this episode. And we talk about one story about these hikers who were hearing whispers in the woods but couldn't see anyone. And we oftentimes, again, strongly themed over the past many seasons, talk about disembodied voices, the book by Tim Marshenko, but then also just in general, the concept of disembodied voices and stuff. And things kind of luring people into the woods and that kind of thing. It's this weird blend of like mystery, science, philosophy, multiple dimensions, you know, all of this stuff sort of just jam-packed in this episode. Where we got the idea for this episode in general, I think, is somehow one of us, Tyler, I don't remember who at this point, but I think
you.
I think probably me. Found this excerpt from some writings by R.J. Crescenzi. And it was entitled Invisible Beings Walk the Earth. And he shares his, you know, encounters with beings from the other side. We also talked about, you know, different theories about, you know, perception filters. I think you told that story again, or you related it, where you and our good buddy Jesse were camping as kids, whether or not certain types of filters can. Well, it reminds me of that movie, that 80s movie, They Live. I'm sure we talked about that in this episode.
I don't think we did, but that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Yeah, it's you know, basically the idea that if you can figure out a way to, I don't know, sort of like filter out, like, so what Woody's talking about is my buddy Jesse and I in 5th grade, my birthday, we all slept in a tent, and Woody and and Jesse and I were the only ones that were still up in the middle of the night. We're looking out the tent. Again, it's like real, you know, hot southern summer night. My birthday's in June. And we had like the tent flap pulled open, but then we had like the bug, you know, like the little screen still closed. And we kept seeing this light kind of that was sort of dancing around in the sky. But then when we were both like, dude, do you see that? And so, you know, of course we kind of like wake up, unzip the tent, step outside, and then we couldn't see it. Hop back in, zipper comes back down. And we realized that it was because we were seeing it through this sort of almost like a filter. So we were seeing it through that weave of like the screen, and somehow it was doing some kind of trick like with like the light. But honestly, like that really was, for me, that was a pretty pivotal moment because it made me realize as like a, you know, 5th grader, however old that is, I guess 11 maybe. My daughter's 9 now. So yeah, it really made me realize that like, wow, what, you know, if we're not seeing this thing in in the everyday life, like if we had some sort of way to like filter out like, whatever, or see beyond the veil, like what are the other things that we're just completely unaware of.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. Like it really, and I think I even said on the episode, I would find out later that, this was years later, like probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I remember reading an article where these scientists were like talking about being able to use like certain glasses or goggles that had like a type of weave or whatever that were allowing them to see, like, I think it was like maybe expanding like the light spectrum, like, the typical human sort of like, so if you imagine like a scale, like, it's like sort of like a compressor, like we're only seeing like a little notch in this much larger scale of like the amount of light that our eyes can visibly see.
Yeah, the visible light spectrum.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yep. And it made me think of that experience. So I really like that.
I'm not sure if we talked about this on the episode or just like, and see, here we go again, but or just like in general. I know it's been part of conversations, with other people too that I've had, where it's like when you think about the way the world looks through, a fly's eyes or a cat's eyes or whatever, they're looking at it in these different spectrums and they're seeing it in a different way. It's even, I don't know, it's really, really neat. And if you haven't seen They Live, again, anytime somebody says, well, does it hold up? I don't really know how to answer that question. To me, it's just a great movie, and it's just a really cool concept of these like elites basically being able to brainwash people, and also you can't see, who they are truly without these like special glasses, which give you the ability to see it. And it's a really cool movie.
Which, that very little people realize that that's actually based off a true story, because all of the lizard people, elites. So,
well, let's listen to a quick clip of one of these stories that we talked about in that show before we get to the next one. Yeah, and I think you've talked about that before, like almost like you're opening up this, I don't even know what to call it, but we'll just call it a door, okay?
Yeah,
you're opening up this door. You're unlocking this ability for something else to come into our world, whether that's our reality, our spiritual world, whatever. And it's almost like it's some sort of trickster archetype that's coming in, masquerading, like you said, as someone familiar to you. So then you can kind of be like, "Ooh, I'm comfortable with this," and blah, blah, blah. And then, unbeknownst to you, it's doing terrible things. Let's jump back in the article and see if our minds change. Because there's a couple things, too, that like already I'm kind of a little skeptical about. But okay, let's jump back in.
Well, wait, real quick. Sorry, I know that. One thing that I do think is interesting is when they do these things and they start off with like the Lord's Prayer or I don't know why. I don't know, maybe like growing up sort of in the Bible Belt and like this tiny little like Baptist church, as a kid. But it's always so weird to me like that whenever I hear of stuff like that sort of juxtaposition of like, okay, we're doing this thing that is like, esoteric or sort of occult-ish, I guess. And then, but we're going to lead it off with like the prayer. I've always thought that was like just pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like you wonder when, because by the time we were growing up, it was kind of like made known to us, hey, you don't mess with that stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
No Ouija boards.
Yeah. All right. Now, remember, let me kind of circle back. Table disappeared. They go downstairs. It's laying top down on the table that's in their library, okay? They didn't hear anything. They didn't whatever. Nobody's opening doors. They just turn on the light. Boom, it's gone, all right?
And how long was that period of time that they did the seance?
Just during the seance, man. Okay.
Well, I didn't know if there was time for like maybe two of the guys to like sneak.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't ask the guy. This article was written a long time ago.
Okay.
Back into it. The following fall, we resumed our seances in the downstairs living room, sitting about the library table and holding our hands upon it, palms down. Loaded with books and other objects, the table must have weighed about 250 pounds. At about the middle of that group of meetings, the heavy table, without any warning, began to lift itself from the floor. A voice we had not heard before said, "Kick your chairs back and hold on to the table because it wants to fly away."
Wow.
That's weird. Dude,
That's a rambunctious table.
I mean, it needs to settle down. We all put our weight onto the table in an effort to hold it down, but it kept rising. Finally, when we were on tiptoe, one of our group called out, "Let's go." We did so and pushed ourselves and our chairs back close to the wall. Soon, we heard the table strike the beamed ceiling and the same voice said, "Keep to the wall where you are." Then, the table came down to rest on the floor as lightly as a feather. Even 1,000 of you would not have been able to hold it down, the voice said. A few meetings after this, we were requested to construct a pine wood box. Now they're taking orders? I mean, this is just, you know.
Which honestly, like, and not to derail it, but that's how a lot of these things, like, that's sort of the pattern. It starts off, like, very sort of subtle, and then, like, this is like a theme that pops up in a lot of our episodes where, they're sort of putting this belief, they're putting this, like, intention, and then it just ramps up. It's kind of like the Bell Witch was the same way. It's pretty fascinating.
Hear more about this rad strangeness on That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 53, The Bell Witch Halloween Special.
Yeah, it's almost like more interaction and more, because now, remember, the guy said that they started doing this every week.
You're right, exactly.
Right, and so it's like every time they do it, it's just like strengthening that ability.
Yeah. One thing it reminds me of is, which as a kid of the 80s, probably before too, is, did your table just levitate?
Oh my gosh. No.
Hello.
Oh boy. Did you just cut out, man?
Bud.
Dude, weird, man.
What just happened?
I mean, so my phone, it was in my hand. It didn't just float up, but it fell out of my hand, and then the recording software just stopped.
What?
Yeah, I don't know, dude. Oh boy. Is it happening?
Wow.
Be sure to listen to the full episode. That Would Be Rad, Season 4, Episode 4, Invisible Beings Walk the Earth.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/SBO. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there?
We're
fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So this next one is, well, when we did it, it immediately became one of my favorite episodes of all time. And that's Season 4, Episode 8, A Glitch in the Matrix, Evidence of Our Simulated Reality. To me, this one was mind-blowing. Anytime we talk about, or get the chance to really kind of just, in a fun way, talk about the simulation theory.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. And this one is the one where we brought in examples of stuff that we found on the internet, stuff that people, I think listeners sent in.
Mm-hmm.
And just in case, Tyler, people don't remember and maybe they don't want to go back and listen to that whole episode, which I encourage you guys and gals to do, especially if you're new to the show. You know, do you want to do a quick rundown of what the simulation theory is?
Yeah, so the simulation theory is sort of this idea that, here in sort of the modernity, if you will, like the, 2020s, or, well, not even 2020s, but like here in the 2000s, a lot of times it's sort of linked to the Matrix movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of the idea that we live in this almost like a better way of saying, we live sort of in a computer program. And so there's sort of an architect or sort of a different levels of like code, and we're living in this sort of pre-programmed kind of space that, I think, the funny thing is I think whenever you have like an example of, people talking about like a simulated reality is whenever they're actually seeing sort of like the glitches in that simulation.
Yeah. And I think since we recorded this episode, I'm sure you've sent me 1,000 others. There's always, I'd say right now, the one that comes to mind immediately are things like the birds looking like they're frozen.
Mm-hmm.
There's also some where it's like somebody will, and you can find these videos on the internet, a dozen, I don't know what the phrase is. Anyway, you can find a lot of these on the internet where it'll be someone drives by, let's say like a street or an intersection, and a cat walks a certain way. And then they have to do something, they deliver something, they're coming back, and then it's almost like identical. It really is a lot like the Matrix in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But there's
go ahead.
And
that's the other thing that I failed to say in my horrible breakdown of the simulation theory. But yeah, there's also the idea of like NPCs, which are like non-player characters. So it's the idea that like some of your surroundings are like animals or people that are kind of like living in the background of our reality, and none of those are like real. They're just there to sort of provide like realness to this simulation.
Right. And then, kind of like the way that they sort of compare that to video games and NPCs or whatever, non-player characters in general, is when they are documenting like or attempting an interaction with this person. And it's just like, they're not even, you know what I mean? Like they don't even understand what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too, which, I'm sure I mentioned on this episode, is sort of like the double slit experiment, which I think kind of relates to this, where it's sort of even like sort of the Schrodinger's cat kind of thing, where it's the idea that like, okay, is this reality sort of generating these sort of background characters or these NPCs just because of like I'm viewing them? Like, is it like an observer effect type thing where, it's like the old phrase, like, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? And it's like, are these people, or is this dog crossing the street, was this gonna happen like whether I whether I came down the street or not? Or was it sort of generated as a background sort of code, if you will, just because
I was going to be there?
I was like coming up on it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like, oh no, why can't I think, what is it called? I just watched it with with my oldest, The Truman Show.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like I even found myself this morning just walking, and it was still early enough in the morning where the sun was fully out, but the moon was still in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And I even was thinking, because I knew we were going to jump in here and talk about this, it made me rethink, man, just like The Truman Show, you know, what would happen? Think about how mind-blowing that would be for you if you just kind of happened to touch like the thing that's just artificial, and you're like, what? And then, there's a staircase there, and you can walk out. And the other thing that you talked about that I definitely remember, and kind of like going through my notes and stuff, is we talked about deja vu being sort of possible evidence of a reset in the simulation.
Yeah.
We talked about people having these vivid memories of events that never happened, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Or crazy stories about seeing like duplicates of themselves or like duplicates of things, I think. And, you know, this is a topic that if I think about it too long, it kind of makes me feel a little weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I don't remember if it was this episode, dude, but I think over time when we talk about this, or when we end up talking about this, we talk about the quote unquote ability to hack the simulation.
Yep.
And, you know, maybe those are moments in history where people have a technology that doesn't really fit the time period. And maybe it isn't time travel. Maybe they've just literally figured out how to hack it.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm not sure if I talked about this on the episode, but like one of my favorite things to bring up is that idea that, and I mean, I'm sure it's not like an original idea, but it is the idea that like, you know, what we view as like magic, or like Aleister Crowley, for example, and that whole sort of, or just even like sort of any sort of alchemical like processes, is that sort of, are those looked at as like bad, or, you know, almost like sacrilegious, if you will, because it's a way of like hacking the system. You know what I mean? Like it like, is alchemy sort of a negative thing because you're figuring out how to transmute one thing from one thing to the other, and like it's almost like you are hacking the simulation, you know?
Right. And it's interesting that you put it that way too, because throughout history, if you think about it, like religion and science have sort of butted heads quite a bit throughout, you know? And so it's like some things that were considered evil, you know, in the Middle Ages are just considered like modern medicine now. And are they hacks, like you said? It's, I don't know, it's all fascinating. And it's kind of like, it's one of those things that I love this topic because it's sort of a topic that is a little bit divisive in some ways, mainly because, especially folks that, you know, if you have a strong like sort of religious belief system or background, I think maybe if you bring up sort of like the simulated reality idea, they can sometimes get kind of offended or mad. And I think in this episode, but since then, at least I know on the show in general, we've talked about how like, that's not how we approach it in terms of, in a way, if you think about it, even from a religious aspect, like it kind of is a simulation in a way, you know, like we're kind of going through these trials and tribulations here on earth in our physical body, but it's not like we really are in kind of an avatar.
Yeah, well, and I've always thought that was kind of bizarre and kind of funny also that you're, you know, sort of hyper religious folks have such an issue with this. I think where that comes from is is because of so much of the terminology is like related to the Matrix.
Right.
And so it comes across as like, oh, it's this sort of computer thing and it's very mechanical. And I don't really see it that way. I know we talked to Joshua Cushion a little bit about that. And it's just, I think it's just the phrasing that's such a turnoff. But in reality, it's like, you know, I mean, biblically it talks about, you know, seeing through a glass darkly and like, you know, like a lifting of the veil, and there's like these battles being fought. in places that, we can't see. And I think it's all that. I think that's all the stuff. But I think, going back to what I was saying before, it's like, I'm pretty sure I probably said this on the episode, but there's that, it's the idea that even Jesus, who was the Son of God and was, divine and the creator of the universe, when he came to earth, it was almost like even with his miracles and stuff, he was still sort of playing by the protocols kind of set. So like, he made the blind man see. It involved him like, and I'm not saying it's because of this, but it was almost like, he, spits on dirt and, makes it mud and rubs it on his face. And, it's like in order to feed the multitude, it was like he had to have these things first.
Right.
And I don't know if he had to, but it's almost like.
Because I think like that's the hard part. I can even hear it happening now. It begins to sound like you're removing the miraculous.
And I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Element out of it. And I think that's what kind of gets people sort of like, it gets under their skin potentially when people talk about the simulation type thing. But see, to me, what you're talking about absolutely fascinates me.
Me too.
The fact that there are still these sort of guidelines and rules that you have to like work within.
Right.
And then, I don't know. It's amazing to me, dude.
Well, because like he was made flesh, so he kind of had to, even though he was God and the creator of everything, he still kind of had to like play by these rules. It's the same reason that like, Satan visited him and was like promising him all this stuff to like tempt him while he was like during his fast and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, that's a really fascinating topic.
Yeah.
And again, I think if you are one of those people that are sort of turned off by the idea of like the simulation theory, just try thinking of it less in terms of like a literal sort of computer program and there's like we're in like some sort of, quantum computer or something like that. And think of it more in terms of like the sort of the esoteric or metaphysical.
Yeah. Well, dude, I often wonder, and I'm sure we brought this up, but I often wonder, it just has to be like people 1,000 years ago, people 500 years ago, people 100 years ago, and then people now would think of this theory in different ways because they didn't have knowledge. We're using our own global experience to inform like our thoughts and opinions and perceptions on things based on our own sort of experience here on Earth, right? And so we're like, oh yeah, you're saying it's a computer program. No. We're only even thinking of it in those terms is because we know of computer programs. We can relate to video games now.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's kind of like one of my all-time favorite quotes by Arthur C. Clarke. It's any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Exactly, dude.
Yeah.
And then, it leads into 100% what we're going to talk about in season 5 because I'm dying to. These people that have existed in history who have tried to hack the rules of physics and science and all this to either unlock or in some cases potentially unleash a power that is beyond just the normal sort of capabilities that we know of now.
Which, by the way, man,
fascinating to me, dude.
Yeah, it is. And it's going to get into some of the stuff that we're going to get into in this upcoming season, but just a little like taste now. It's something I've been looking into, I guess in the last few years, but especially recently in terms of like sort of like the books of Enoch and that whole sort of the Watchers, the Nephilim, it's like the Watchers came down, they laid with, the sons of God laid with the daughters of men, they created the Nephilim. But in the books of Enoch, they talk how and we've talked about this numerous times for our new listeners, but, it talks about how these Watchers or, if you're sort of more traditional, I guess like kind of the fallen angels, really, it talks about how they gave us like knowledge and technology. Like it said that like that's where the origins of like teaching women like makeup to be able to sort of, kind of like woo men, it taught us it's like like metallurgy, how to make like weapons. They supposedly were responsible for teaching us what they call like the 7 sacred sciences, which are like geometry and like astrology, all this kind of stuff. And so it's that idea of like some of those things could, like, you know, sort of the early stage, because it does talk about like witchcraft and a lot of that stuff in the books of Enoch too. And so it is interesting if you look at it as like, okay, these fallen angels sort of were the ones who gave us some of this stuff, like taught us like these like hacks. And that was not a good thing. That was like, you know, it was sort of frowned upon, I would say.
Yeah. And, you know, Well,
sorry, but I think it's cool because if you're looking at it like that, that would mean that the beings that were sort of part of the original programming, they knew how to hack the system, and therefore, like, they passed that on to us.
Yeah.
Which would present a host of a lot of problems. But
yeah, and just good story, right? Also, because it's like, imagine these beings having compassion for folks that, you know, two things. One, you've got beings that maybe have compassion and want to help. And then on the flip side, because again, like we say always on the show, if there's good, there's going to be bad too. It's just the yin and the yang. It's part of it.
Yep.
Then there's going to be beings who kind of want to, you know, tempt and cause trouble. And so, I mean, God, we see it. We see it in real life even, dude. It's almost at this point part of human nature. You know, because of from the beginning that we know of, there are people that want to help, and there's people that want to sow sort of like discord and chaos and feed on that and fear. And, you know, then there's, you know, people that want to spread love and joy. And that's always sort of like battling together. And it's like the idea of that happening so early on is just so cool, man.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's play a clip from this show. And I think in this clip, we kind of dive into one of those real life experiences. So enjoy that. Again, I encourage everybody to go back, listen to this episode, season 4, episode 8, A Glitch in the Matrix, Evidence of Our Simulated Reality.
All right. One of those places is called Goblin Creek up the Index Gulliema Road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there and do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that when cut in half and polished would resemble a scenic picture of the view of the mountains from within a cave. Probably a geode. I do not recall the true name of the stones. We just called them picture rocks. Wow. My father's friend and neighbor owned an art gallery mineral shop that used to be a church. If you have ever driven through Startup on your way from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, you might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place that we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was a lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that we could presumably get lost while en route if one didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at this creek, I'd only ever seen 2 other people out there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshots from our target practicing session and tracked us down to make sure everything was fine. The other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was about 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man that looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised that we would run into anyone in this rather remote section of the mountains. But as I got closer to this man, he was heading down to the creek and I was heading up to the road. He seemed to grow increasingly more startled, as if he was seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed. He just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words to ask me. After passing him, I remember thinking how much the guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking. I continued on to the truck, dumping my load of rock off at the truck, and headed back down to the river with my dad. Or to my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied that he hadn't. I remembered this encounter quite vividly ever since. Last year, I was visiting my family in Snohomish and decided to head up to Old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. I think we already know where this is going. It had been about 15 years since I was last up there. Along the way up there, I found out that the Index Galima Road had apparently washed out years before. Luckily, I knew of another way up there via Jack Pass. I found the dirt road and parked where my dad used to park and proceeded to walk along through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that absolutely shook me to the core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek. A boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weight. As we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked as the boy looked exactly like I did at this stage. I meant to say something to him as he passed, but could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at the moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped when it all really hit me. I remembered the encounter from my teenage years and realized I had just lived the other half of the experience. Both the man and the boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned around to catch up to the boy in the thick western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up to the road where my truck was to find nothing. There wasn't anywhere else besides the road for him to go to, and I hadn't stalled so long as to not be able to catch up to him. He was simply gone. Vanished. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down the creek, half expecting to find my dad fishing on the bank 15 years younger, but found nobody. I ended up going home and deciding that this experience was too unbelievable to tell even my friends and family. I just wanted to get this out there to a wonderful Reddit community to see what others think and hopefully to see if anyone else has this type of experience as well.
Jeez, man.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, there's like elements of Flight of the Navigator in there.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
We will return after these messages.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That would be rad.
All right, next up is my third favorite, third being in order of speaking them out loud right now, and that is Season 4, Episode 26, Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove Incident.
Oh, man.
I know, man.
I love this one.
And this is partially why I didn't tell you which ones I picked, because I wanted to steal it.
Yeah.
And you're going to be real mad about the next one. But this was hands down one of the most fascinating UFO cases.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds, and there's elements of it that remind me of the Flatwoods Monster, my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. It's just, there's
Big
something
time.
about these hunters are out in the woods. You know, we can all kind of potentially, I'm not sure if I can't speak for everybody, but if you had any kind of camping experience in general or whatsoever, you can all kind of relate to how sometimes the woods can be kind of freaky, or the sounds of it. You get used to it the more that you're in it. But imagining these guys that have just been hunting for a long time. They're out there, they get lost, and they're separated. And I think about this case, actually, man, quite a bit ever since we've talked about it, just because it's so fascinating. And this little, like, skirmish that the main guy had, like, he's just, like, up in this tree, right? He climbed that tree to escape them. They're trying to gas him. It's just an incredible story that I hope to goodness nobody just accidentally missed or skipped through, because I think it might be, gosh, it's really hard to say this, but I think it might be one of my favorite UFO cases that we've done at all.
Yeah, and I would almost say, I mean, maybe I can't really like think if I'm missing one, hit me up. But it seems to me like it may be the only case where we fight back.
Right.
you know?
Yeah, because
which
so
is so
often,
cool.
I mean, what a great point, dude. So often we hear about, like, what's his name? Travis
Walton.
Walton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he gets abducted, and then he's just plagued with this mentally for the rest of his life. People don't believe him, yada, yada, yada. You hear about Betty and Barney Hill. You hear about, so many cases. It's like they did something to me and whatever. This is the one where it's like, okay, these guys, they definitely played D&D. Just because they hunted doesn't mean they weren't down for some adventure, man. He climbs a tree. He's like, you know, popping shots at him and stuff. An arrow or something, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, dude, such a ranger.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, dude.
I mean, he's an elf.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely still gets overpowered.
Yeah. I mean,
he falls asleep like 4 times.
Well, I mean, you know, look.
Like the gas.
He reminds me a lot of you in that while he tries to problem solve and be innovative in doing so, he's also just kind of not, he's weak, you know?
Yeah, he's very weak. Yeah.
But he outlasted him. So in the end, he still wins.
Yeah, absolutely.
The aspects of this that I also liked was that, and this is kind of different too, I think, and kind of separates this from the other sort of incidents, is that almost those aliens and I don't know if you want to call them robots or whatever, these beings in these suits, were almost just as surprised to see him as he was to see them. Did I say that weird?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
No, you're dead on with that. Yeah, it is weird because they did seem surprised, but then...
And they're like, whoa, you know?
Yeah. But he witnessed like the ship landing and stuff, so...
Yeah, but I mean, to me, that always seemed like, hey guys, we need to collect some samples. Like, I kind of felt bad for these beings because the first wave of them seemed more like, you know, gatherers than they were hunters. And so they're just kind of like gathering up stuff. And this dude, they have maybe sort of minimal or rudimentary sort of defense mechanisms available. They're not really like battle bots or whatever.
Yeah, right.
And they're just like, and all of a sudden it's like, shoots arrow, and they're like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, we got to take care of this guy, or at least like maybe gas him so that he doesn't hurt us and we can just sort of be on our way.
Yeah. I also really like, I think my favorite thing about this case is the fact that you see sort of like organic humanoid, like, you know, like made of flesh and bone, it would appear. And then you have like accompanied by like a more sort of like robotic type entity.
Right.
I think that's really interesting.
For sure. You know, and when I think about cases like this in general, and I'm thinking about, you know, aliens or, you know, time travelers or something, the reason why I say time travel, and I hate to just always bring up time travel, folks, but I love it, is like, if I was going to go back in time, well, why would you disguise yourself like that, though? Never mind.
I mean,
I'm just saying, like, if you were from far, far in the future and you're not really sure, well, even then it doesn't make sense. So never mind. Bad idea. Should have, hey, guys, you know how you like filter thoughts in your mind before you sing them out loud?
In real time, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do that. So,
yeah, we were witnessing like that thought process.
yeah, happening in real time.
Yeah.
Let's get to a clip here. So this clip is more about like talking about the hunter and his strategy and, well, just gives you more of an idea what happened a little bit. And, you know, hopefully encourage you to go back and give it a listen. Then this thing comes over to the base of Don's tree, stands there, slowly raises its hand to its mouth, and suddenly a white vapor starts coming out, rising up toward Don. Now again, he's like 12 feet up in this tree. He doesn't smell anything, but whatever it was, apparently completely knocks him out. He slumps over, unconscious. Well, here's what's even crazier. So the only reason he knows it knocks him out is because he kind of like, he's like waking up, doesn't know how long later. He starts dry heaving from whatever the gas was, which again can happen with anesthetic.
Yeah,
you know?
right. Yeah.
And as he's trying to gather his thoughts, like, what the heck is happening here with it? The dadgum robot comes back and does it again. And dude, it happens over and over. This thing keeps on getting sort of like escalated. And is just knocking him out. It's not working. Knocking him out. It's not working.
Didn't he almost fall out of the tree?
Yeah. So, like, of course, dude, like, think about being up in a tree and just, like, you know, when someone is truly knocked out, you're just, your body's limp.
Oh, yeah.
You're
just dead weight. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, finally, you know, one of the more recent sort of, like, he's you know, kind of come to again. He's doing something that I think it would have been, like, this is the part where, like I said earlier, I would have stayed still.
Yeah.
I would have thought, you know, if I'm quiet, they'll just pass by. I'm not going to try anything crazy. There's a point, I think, in all of us where it changes. There's a flip. There's a switch that gets flipped from flight to fight.
Yep.
And at this point, Don is like, you know, I'm going to take matters in my own hands. I'm putting fate. My fate is going to be decided by me, you know? So he decides to make a move. And even though he was scared out of his mind, he couldn't justify shooting the smaller humanoid creatures. And they didn't seem to be directly threatening to him, but the robot, this one that's spraying him with this gas, that's the one he's going to go for.
Which, you know, that the robot was, like, being controlled by those other ones.
So he picks his target, he draws his bow back, and he fires.
Yeah.
The arrow hits dead center on the robot's chest. It pushed the robot back a few feet, but it also, like, ricocheted off, causing this bright flash of light that he later describes as like an arc welder or something, right? And again, he's just utilizing his own sort of frame of reference.
Which to me, that's always been an interesting part, because originally I just thought, oh, well, it was, you know, it was pitch black and it just created like a little spark. But like him being an actual welder, for him to say that it was like, you know, kind of like an arc light type thing, like I wonder if there's some sort of almost like a force field type something happening, you know?
Yeah. I thought that too.
I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, again, he's not really, I don't think he would know the concept of force field at that point.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Be sure to listen to the full episode, That Would Be Rad, Season 4, Episode 26, Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove Incident.
We will return after these messages.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. Last but certainly not least, I know this is the one that's going to make Tyler essentially come unglued, that I didn't sort of let him know that I was doing this until we got here today. Number 4, Season 4, Episode 27, You're Being Impersonated by the Other Voice, the Gary Sudbrink Story.
Maybe my favorite case of the season, if not, like, clearly, definitely in the top 5 of all time, any of the topics we've, and mainly because there's, I mean, your quote unquote like evidence is all like audio,
right?
So it's a very unique case because we literally have a play-by-play of everything that went down. And it's so weird. And it's got that like sort of pre-internet, you know, sort of like Toynbee Tile meets just that era. And it's, man, such a good case.
Yeah, it's awesome because it immediately brings you back for our generation to what it felt like back then, you know?
Yep.
It's a case that I think would be maybe more mysterious to like our kids because they won't be able to really like, I don't understand. There's just one phone in the whole house?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or like being able to jump on like the different line. Like another phone.
Right. That's a good point, yeah. And for those of you that don't remember or haven't listened to it yet, just briefly, it's a story of a guy who started getting these strange, eerie, robotic-sounding phone calls, and they seem to know too much about him. Now, this guy, he was in the Air Force, and he was stationed in San Antonio, Texas. Ends up, kind of on a whim, I think, going to visit his family back in New York. And then that's when these calls started happening. And then we'll let you listen to the rest of the episode, you know, going back to it or whatever. But for me, it was not just a fascinating story. It immediately brought me back to that era of the early 90s, I think it was. But also, it was just hilarious in some ways to hear the interaction. And it's like, what a treasure to have access to those audio recordings so that you can kind of like listen to their experience as it was happening. I don't know, man. It's just really, really interesting. Potentially, like, was this entity impersonating the voice? Is it just a prank call? Yeah. How did they know so much about him? Was it the government itself messing with this guy? Did he have knowledge of stuff that he wasn't supposed to? Yeah. You know, we went really deep into a bunch of different theories. Tyler, I think you kind of brought up again this idea of mimicry and it being used as a form of like psychological warfare. We talk about other cases in where people kind of getting phone calls from folks that have either recently passed away, things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and the other thing that is bizarre is like, I don't know where I'd land on it because there's so many, like, it definitely sounds, so I think if you take it out of context of some of the other stuff that he mentions where, you know, he ran across like the guy asking all this information in the airport and then he gets on the plane and there's like, I think it's like another guy asking all this information and then like, I guess while he would have been on the plane, like his friend gets a call like in Texas asking about, oh, no. He gets like a same call of like kind of the same stuff, but he thinks that it's Gary like playing a trick on him or something.
Right.
There's all this other like...
Yeah, his friend gets a call before he's even there. Doesn't even know he's coming because Gary Sudbrink doesn't tell anyone. He's going to just like pop in.
Yep, exactly. And so under that, like, you know, understanding, it's just bizarre because there's so many things that they're saying that like it sounds kind of like a recording, but then there'll be like slight variations where it's like, oh no, that was a little bit different than before, but like the cadence is off. Like it, I'm sure we talk about on the episode, but it definitely brings sort of the Men in Black, you know, those early like 50s, 60s.
Men in Black. It brings back, thoughts about Mothman and John Keel talking about getting his weird phone calls and then other people. And that even happened in the Blackbird of
Chernobyl.
Yeah.
Yep.
And avoided saying it because I always say it wrong. And I mean, so there's, I don't know, it's very, very weird, man. Was it a harbinger of doom for him? Well, I think just go back and listen to that episode.
And also, I mean, even if you don't believe any of it, I think it's entertaining enough, even just for like the dad being, like his questioning is hilarious because he's clearly like, I think recently in the past year, he had his own sort of UFO experience. And so like all of his questions are like, are you from another planet?
Yeah, well, just, dude, right out of the gate. We laugh about it in the show on that episode. Like, he's like, hey, Dad, come listen to this. He's like, I know who you are. Hey, I know who you are. You're from the other planets. And you're like, whoa, holy smokes.
It's amazing.
He just goes straight for it, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Him and the uncle or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and there was other stuff that even Gary over time sort of experienced on a trip to Egypt and all kinds of stuff. So you'll have to listen to the episode to get all that. But let's jump into a clip from that show to kind of give you a taste of what you're in for going back and listening to it. So basically, he goes to the airport, okay? And he has this strange interaction with somebody. He says there's this guy just kind of standing around with a clipboard. He's dressed in like dark clothing, but relatively just normal attire, okay? And the guy comes up to him and says, hey, and he's got this clipboard. He's like looking down, right? And stuff. Are you Gary Sudbrink? He's like, yeah. He's like, okay. And you're departing? Yeah. And he's like, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm just going to visit some folks. Oh, okay. And then that was it. Didn't really give him a ton of details, but it stood out to him, not at the time necessarily. He says that he thought that it was strange, but again, he's in the military, and so, he doesn't know. Maybe there's an intelligence agency sort of, keeping track of things that he doesn't know about. He doesn't really think twice about it, essentially.
Well, also, just as a product of like the times, like I feel like we look over so often, like just this sort of, like we were so much more like naive to things, especially with people that are like officials or that kind of thing. So like, for example, I remember as a kid, like walking in Lakeshore Mall and like, they would walk out, which this is nobody that's like younger is going to remotely know what this is about. But like especially in Lakeshore Mall, you would have those people with clipboards coming out and they would ask you to do those like surveys.
Oh, yeah.
And dude, I did it like 5 times just because I felt like, oh, I'm supposed to do this because they're like
did they
official.
Did they pay you or?
They
did
ended
some
up
that
giving me coupons.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool actually.
Yeah. I've done some like, where they, I guess like, what do they call that? Like,
it's like a
test marketing or whatever, whenever you're like seeing something and then they play like 10 seconds of an ad and then like, okay, whatever.
Yep. Same thing.
And I've done that kind of stuff before.
Or like a test panel. Maybe.
Yeah. Anyhow, I don't know that he thought it was that necessarily, but again, because he's in the military, he's used to like people just making sure they're keeping track of everything. And frankly, and we'll talk about this later, there's some things going on in the world, And so he gets on the airplane, and this is something else that I found in a recent interview with him, that he talks about when he was on the plane before he left. So he's already had this strange sort of interaction with somebody. Before he left, he hears like helicopters flying around. He's like, what in the world? And then it kind of just went away. Again, didn't think anything of it, but we'll come back to that fact later. So he gets on his flight. He lands at JFK. And for our international listeners who aren't familiar, there's really 2 main airports in New York that you can fly to. One is LaGuardia. The other one is JFK. I'm not going to get into which one I like the best. But anyhow, so he goes there.
Oh, no. Hold on. You totally missed another part. Not only was there one guy with a clipboard, once he got on the plane, there was a totally separate guy with a clipboard that sat in the seat behind him and was asking him questions the whole time.
What?
Yeah, and at this point, it says that Gary asked the guy to leave, and then moments later, a stewardess had to make him like get up because she realized that he was also in the wrong seat, and then he never saw him on the plane again. So that's 2 guys with clipboards just asking him all this weird sort of personal information.
Man, that's weird. Plus, then he hears like some helicopters flying around in the distance. It's almost like at this point, the first guy, not a big deal. Second guy, perturbed a little bit and potentially questioning like what is going on.
Well, he says he thought he was like a part of like the Census Bureau.
Oh man, okay, just collecting voting data,
just on planes,
whatever. Hey sir, you forgot to fill out the card that we sent in the mail. I tracked it down. Okay, weird.
It's weird, yeah.
So he flies into JFK, and the only reason that's even significant is when he arrives at his parents' house in New York. One of the first things that he does is he calls his friend Mike. But Mike, when he calls him, is super confused because he tells Gary, we talked yesterday. And not just that, they had apparently talked about how Gary flew into LaGuardia, even though Gary, again, actually flew into JFK. To make it weirder, Mike says that Gary told him he was feeling sick with a cold. But Gary felt fine. He didn't have a cold, nothing, totally healthy, and, of course, didn't talk to Mike yesterday. He just got here.
Which, dude, once you hear the audio, that's kind of bizarre. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah. It's strange, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can throw out the word that you're just dying to throw out here. Go ahead.
Doppelganger.
I mean, is that what we've got going on? Don't answer.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
It was rhetorical.
But one thing that I also failed to mention is after the second guy was like shooed away, apparently when he landed, it kind of bothered him so much that he ended up calling his landlord and having to keep an eye on the house.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. So he calls his landlord. I completely forgot about that. Thank you. Calls his landlord. He describes sort of being, thinking like, man, these people know me? Are they going to go to my apartment and steal something? And I remember him saying something along the lines of like, I'm not real sure why I was worried because I was kind of poor and I didn't really have a ton in there, you know?
Yeah.
Not necessarily poor,
but also like a bunch. Like being in the Air Force, I wonder if he was thinking of it in like possibly that sort of scenario as like, well, are these people like sort of trying to get information? Like, is it like because, even like lower end, or not lower end, that's not a good way to put it, but like lower ranking members of, our armed forces, like I would imagine that you're, it's kind of like beaten into your head of like, hey, always kind of be on the lookout. Right. Don't give too much information. That kind of whole, especially the Cold War era sort of.
Oh yeah,
stuff.
for sure. Okay, so he talks to Mike. At this point, dude, you've got to be just like, what is going on, man? Am I in another universe?
Yeah.
I would be kind of freaking out a little bit, but then maybe I would be like, I don't know. I don't know that I could just be like, okay, Ma, you got the spaghetti. You know what I mean?
Hey, Ma.
Yeah. So although all that is already just strange enough, the real strangeness begins when another call comes in, I think while he's talking to Mike, actually. Now, this is the early days, again, of, not really necessarily early days of call waiting, but I was thinking about this when I went for a run the other day. I feel like that sound, that boop, boop, kind of evolved and made its way into our, the current era. When we get a call when you're on your like smartphone or whatever, that same sort of sound is, I think in the old days, it would just sort of be like a weird, like the audio would sort of drop out and there'd be like a click or something, right? I couldn't remember. I'm like, why can't I remember what the early days of call waiting sounded like?
Dang, dude. I hate these moments where like you realize like I will never be able to remember.
A gap. Your brain like deleted that file.
Yeah, dude, exactly.
Well, listeners, help us out here. Comment on our Instagram post and let us know what we've forgotten. I can't remember for the life of me. But anyhow, he gets this alert that there's another call coming in, so he clicks over. And by the way, younger listeners, what you had to do was you had to press the hang up button. There wasn't like a, green answer call like there is now. And you click over to the other line. And what he hears on the other side, it's just unsettling to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
There's this deep, mechanical voice, almost robotic, that begins to speak to him. Instead of hanging up, though, Gary does something that would turn out to be crucial, and honestly, it's probably really the only reason that I think this story has stood the test of time, and, it just makes it so much more interesting. He hits the record button on his answering machine.
Be sure to listen to the full episode. That Would Be Rad. Season 4, Episode 27, You Were Being Impersonated by the Other Voice. The Gary Sudbrink Story.
Man, looking back at these episodes, and like I said, it was really, really hard to choose what were my favorites. Really, I chose these 4 because I wanted to just sort of talk about them today.
And steal them.
Yeah. Well, steal them for sure. But I figured you're probably going to pick one of the Shadow Man ones. And don't worry, you have a lot to choose from. And
we have a whole summer worth.
And, well, dude, like you said, when we were talking about the invisible beings, once you start looking at what we talked about this year, it's like, man, we kind of had a lot of fascination with that this year.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, too, that I think we should say to our listeners, which is something that we always find interesting. And it's where sort of that phrase, that we came up with, which is synchronicity abounds, is usually we'll roughly have like a game plan. And usually that game plan gets thrown out the window immediately because we'll research one topic and then it'll be like, I don't know, man, this thing kind of happened, recently that made me think of this thing, and it may be better if we discuss this. And then that thing kind of like plants some seeds for this other thing, and then now you have a whole summer of Shadow Man episodes. But there definitely was this theme of like these other type of beings maybe sort of interloping in our dimension. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, what a great season.
Yeah, man. It was fun. I still can't believe that we're getting pretty close to the new season.
I know.
And all of that. And I think one of the things that I think I love the most about just doing this show, besides hanging out with my best friend, of course, is this opportunity to kind of dig deeper, to look at stuff at a different angle, to learn new stories. Like most of these things 10 years ago, some of them I had known or heard about, but many of them I had not. Even other than like sort of the Matrix or the simulated reality sort of theory, I would say almost all of these I hadn't heard of before,
Yeah.
And so that opportunity to sort of dig deeper into those, to talk about them, to sort of just really just, I don't know, I just love that the things that sort of make you think about stuff. And I mean, really, it is also the way we sort of came up with our podcast title. It's like, That Would Be Rad. Or, just to think about all those things if they existed.
Yeah.
As we're kind of getting ready to close, one thing that I wanted to say is, I'm curious, what were your favorite episodes, listeners? What ones did you, I don't know, like latch on to? And, the episodes that maybe you think about, often. I don't know. Because for me, it really is the simulation theory, the shadow beings, sometimes the Gary Sudbrink, the uncle. Let us know. And you can do that in the comments on Spotify, actually. We're getting a lot more comments lately. And my apologies for us not getting to them quicker. But, we're still kind of technically on vacation.
Yeah. Yeah, so whatever those standout episodes were for you, we'd love to hear about it. And also, one thing that we mentioned our buddy Clay a lot, and he is sort of the honorary third member. You can typically find him over on Instagram, and you can tell when he's currently listening to the new episode, because he's like, it's basically like a timestamp of as he's listening, like comments, which just kind of make our week. But it is interesting, and Clay's great about, kind of throwing out like, oh, well, this is really cool, but did you think about this thing? And it's sort of these like little, other things that we may have missed, and we're all about that stuff. So anytime like there's other topics or there's like other angles maybe with what we're talking about that maybe we haven't thought of, feel free to shoot it our way. Yeah, for sure. And that includes back episodes too. So one of the things that's happening in the comments on Spotify now is, as people are sort of going back, maybe they've recently discovered our show and they're sort of, listening to the back catalog, they're commenting on specific episodes. Like our new listener, Lou from Mississippi, commented on the one where we talk about the Ark of the Covenant and this theory, this idea of them being like these almost batteries, energy sources that were portable. It could be used in warfare and power the technology to build pyramids. I mean, just all kinds of cool stuff. So stuff like that, never hesitate to send it our way, because we just love that stuff. It's not like we think about it like, we know, because, we probably don't, Yeah. I mean, if there's any foundation that this show is built on, it's the idea that like, hey, we don't know everything, and we're totally cool with not having answers. But I think that allows us to explore sort of maybe more abstract ways or angles of looking at these topics. And that's the stuff that we really dig. If you want to join into the conversation, head on over to our Instagram. Comment if you got something to tell us, your own experience. Shoot us a DM if it's more long form. Maybe you have like a localized urban legend or something that's only in your area that really hasn't made the rounds yet on social media. That's the stuff we're all about. Shoot it to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. And even better than all those, head on over to our website, thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can leave a voice memo and in your own voice, tell your own story and maybe make it show up in a future episode. If you want to support the show, head on over to our Patreon, the Rabbit Trail. It's kind of the best way to really show your support, and it kind of gives you a little more of That Would Be Rad. If you feel like you're not getting enough over here on the free feed, it means so much to us, and it's just such a kind and just kind of inspiring way to help support the show. It means so much to us, and because times are tough, and so we get it. Tell a friend about the show. Leave a 5-star review whenever you can. Leave some comments over on whatever podcatcher you're listening to us on, or YouTube, I guess, now that we're over on YouTube, and all the back episodes. I guess that's it. You got anything else, Woody?
No, man. I don't think so.
All right. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
You still there, bud?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were about to play something.
No.
Okay.
Shh.